The roar of the rushing river drowned out everything else, as John Whitmore urged his horse forward through the downpour, squinting against the sheets of rain, when he saw something pale tumbling in the swollen current downstream. He did not hesitate, digging his heels into his mount's flanks and racing toward what he now realized with growing horror was a woman being swept away by the raging Apache Creek just outside Eagar, Arizona territory, in this miserable spring of 1884. The water had risen higher than he had ever seen it in his 7 years of ranching this lonely stretch of land, fed by snowmelt from the White Mountains, and now amplified by 3 days of relentless rain. John had ridden out to check his fences before they washed away completely, never expecting to find another soul foolish enough to be out in this weather. Yet there she was, her dark hair plastered to her head, arms flailing as the current dragged her toward the bend where the creek narrowed and the rocks jutted up like broken teeth. He pushed his horse harder, the animal's hooves throwing up great sprays of mud as they galloped along the bank. John's mind worked frantically, calculating angles and speed, knowing he had only seconds before she would be dashed against those rocks. He yanked his lasso free from his saddle, his fingers working purely on instinct honed from years of roping cattle, and sent the loop sailing out over the churning water. The rope fell short. John cursed, reeling it back in as his horse danced nervously at the water's edge. The woman had gone under, and for one terrible moment he thought he had lost her, but then her head broke the surface again, her mouth open in a soundless scream he could not hear over the river's fury. He spurred his mount forward, keeping pace with the current, and threw again. This time the loop settled around her shoulders, and he immediately wrapped the rope around his saddle horn and turned his horse away from the bank. The sudden jerk as the rope went taut nearly unseated him, but his gelding was strong and well-trained, leaning into the pull. John felt the tremendous force of the river fighting him for possession of this stranger's life, and for a moment it seemed the water would win. "Come on," he growled, though whether to his horse or to the woman or to himself he could not say. His arms burned with the effort of keeping the rope secure as his horse backed step by step, drawing the woman closer to shore. She had stopped fighting now, either unconscious or simply exhausted, which made the work both easier and more terrifying. When she was close enough, John leaped from his saddle and waded into the shallows, the icy water shocking even through his thick pants and boots. He grabbed her under the arms and hauled her onto the muddy bank, rolling her onto her side as she immediately began coughing up what seemed like half the creek. Her whole body shook with violent tremors, her lips already turning blue from the cold. John knew he had to get her warm and dry immediately, or saving her from drowning would prove meaningless when she died of exposure. His ranch house was only a mile away, much closer than town. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt, and managed to get her draped across his saddle before mounting behind her and wrapping his arms around to hold her in place. The ride back to his homestead felt like it took hours, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. The woman drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling incoherently, and John found himself talking to her steadily, telling her to hold on, that they were almost there, that she was going to be fine. He was not sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. His house was modest, a 3-room cabin he had built himself from timber he had hauled down from the mountains, but it had a good stone fireplace and a solid roof that did not leak even in weather like this. John kicked open the door and carried the woman directly to the fireplace, laying her on the bearskin rug before the cold hearth. His hands shook as he struck a match and lit the kindling he always kept ready, and soon flames were crackling to life. The woman needed to get out of her wet clothes, but John hesitated, his sense of propriety warring with the practical knowledge that she would die if he left her in them. He compromised by working quickly and keeping his eyes averted as much as possible, stripping away her sodden dress and undergarments and wrapping her in every blanket he owned. Her skin was like ice beneath his fingers. Once she was bundled by the fire, John changed his own soaked clothing and set a pot of water to heat. He found himself studying her face as he worked, noticing despite the pallor and the blue tinge to her lips that she was beautiful, perhaps in her mid-20s, with high cheekbones and dark lashes that lay against her skin like shadows. He wondered who she was, what she had been doing out there, whether anyone was looking for her. It took nearly an hour before some color began to return to her face, and her shivering eased. John had been bathing her hands and feet with warm water, trying to restore circulation when her eyes suddenly opened. They were gray, he noticed, the color of storm clouds, and they fixed on him with confusion and fear. "You are safe," he said quickly, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You were in the creek. I pulled you out." She stared at him for a long moment, her lips moving but no sound emerging. Then she closed her eyes again, and he thought she had lost consciousness once more, but she spoke, her voice barely a whisper. "My wagon." "What about your wagon?" "Went off the road. Too much water. I tried to get out." Her eyes opened again, clearer now. "My trunk. Everything I own." John shook his head. "Whatever was in that wagon is long gone, madam. The creek is running higher than I have ever seen. You are lucky to be alive." Something flickered across her face, some emotion he could not quite read, and then she nodded slowly. "Yes, lucky." She did not sound as though she felt lucky at all. "What is your name?" John asked. Laura Sinclair." She tried to sit up but swayed dangerously, and John quickly moved to support her with a hand on her shoulder. "Easy now. You have been through quite an ordeal. I am John Whitmore. This is my ranch." Laura looked around the cabin, taking in the sparse furnishings, the rough-hewn walls, the simple practicality of everything. "Where am I exactly?" "About 3 miles northeast of Eager. You are in the Arizona Territory if you did not know." "I knew that much." "I was headed to Eager." She paused, her face clouding. "I was supposed to meet someone there." John waited, but she did not elaborate. Instead, she seemed to notice for the first time that she was wearing nothing but blankets, and color flooded her cheeks. "My clothes, drying." He gestured to where he had hung them on pegs near the fireplace. The dress was torn and muddy, clearly ruined. "I apologize for the liberty, but you would have frozen." "Of course. Thank you." Laura pulled the blankets more tightly around herself, and an awkward silence fell between them. John cleared his throat. "Are you hungry? I could make some coffee, heat up some stew." "Coffee sounds wonderful," Laura said, and he was relieved to have something to do with his hands. As John busied himself with the coffee pot, he found himself acutely aware of Laura's presence in his home. It had been so long since another person had been in this space, let alone a woman. Not since Martha died 3 years ago had a woman crossed his threshold. The thought of his late wife brought the familiar ache to his chest, though time had dulled it somewhat from the sharp agony it had once been. "How long have you lived here?" Laura asked, watching him work. 7 years. Built the cabin myself when I first claimed the land. All alone." John hesitated. "My wife was with me the first 4 years. She passed from fever." "I am sorry," Laura said softly, and something in her tone made him think she understood loss. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and brought one to her, helping her hold it steady as her hand still trembled slightly. She sipped gratefully, closing her eyes as the warmth spread through her. "What were you doing out in this storm?" John asked. Laura was quiet for a moment, staring into her coffee. The stage broke an axle about 10 miles back. The driver said he could fix it, but it would take time, and there was a farmer passing by with a wagon who offered to take me as far as the turnoff to Eager. I thought I could walk the rest of the way, but then the rain got worse and the road turned to mud. The wagon got stuck, and when the farmer tried to get it free, it slipped right off into the creek. She shuddered at the memory. He made it to the bank on the other side. I went under. And this person you were meeting, will they be worried? Something bitter crossed Laura's face. I doubt he will notice I am not there. I was answering a letter, you see. A marriage proposal from a man I have never met. A rancher who needed a wife. She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Seems I cannot even get married without nearly dying in the process. John felt a strange tightness in his chest at her words. A mail-order bride, then, coming all the way out here to marry a stranger. He had heard of such arrangements becoming more common as men outnumbered women in the territories, but he had never quite understood the desperation that must drive someone to such a measure. You came all this way to marry someone you do not know. Laura's gray eyes met his, defiant. I had my reasons. My parents died last year of influenza, leaving debts I could not pay. My brother wanted to sell me off to his business partner, a man 3 times my age who already buried 2 wives. This seemed a better option. Her voice softened, or at least a different one. Where did you come from? Chicago. My father was a clerk and we never had much, but it was enough. Then he and mother got sick and the medical bills, the funeral costs. She shook her head. I worked at a dress shop, but it was barely enough to keep a room, let alone pay what was owed. When I saw the advertisement in the newspaper, a rancher in Arizona Territory seeking a wife, it felt like Providence. A fresh start. John tried to imagine this woman, clearly educated and refined despite her circumstances, making a life in the harsh desert country with some stranger. What is his name, this rancher? Thomas Green. Do you know him? John nodded slowly. I know of him. His spread is south of town, about 15 miles from here, runs cattle and horses. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I have heard he is a hard man. Lost his first wife in childbirth along with the baby. Laura paled slightly. He did not mention that in his letters. How long have you been corresponding? 3 months. He seemed kind in his writing, lonely. He promised a home, security, respect. She looked down at her hands. It seemed like more than I had. The storm continued to rage outside, rain hammering against the roof and windows. John glanced toward the door, knowing there was no possibility of taking Laura to town or to Thomas Green's ranch until the weather cleared. They were stuck here together, at least for tonight. You should rest, John said. Take my bed, I will sleep out here by the fire. I cannot take your bed, Laura protested. You nearly drowned, you need proper rest, I insist. Laura looked as though she might argue further, but another wave of exhaustion seemed to wash over her, and she nodded. John helped her to her feet, keeping the blankets wrapped around her, and led her to the small bedroom. It was barely large enough for the bed and a trunk, but the mattress was good and the quilts were warm. Thank you, Laura said, settling onto the bed with a sigh. You saved my life, Mr. Whitmore. John, please. John. She said his name softly, as though trying it out. I owe you everything. He shook his head. You owe me nothing. Any decent person would have done the same. He moved toward the door, then paused. Try to sleep. We will figure out what to do in the morning when the storm passes. But the storm did not pass in the morning. If anything, it intensified, the rain coming down in solid sheets and the wind howling around the cabin like a living thing. John woke stiff and sore from sleeping on the floor, his back protesting the hard surface. He built up the fire and was making coffee when Laura emerged from the bedroom, still wrapped in blankets and looking much better than she had the night before. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Sore, tired, but alive, thanks to you." She came closer to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "Is it still raining?" "Has not let up. The creek will be even higher now, no way to cross it safely, and the roads will be impassable." Laura bit her lip, worry creasing her forehead. "Mr. Green will think I changed my mind, that I am not coming. Even if you could reach town, you could not get to his ranch in this weather. And call me John, please." They shared a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and coffee, and John tried not to notice how domestic it felt to have another person at his table, someone to talk to over the morning meal. Laura seemed educated, well-spoken, and as they talked he learned she had attended school through the 8th grade, unusual for a woman, and could read and write fluently. Her father had encouraged her education even though her mother thought it impractical. "What will you do if you cannot marry Mr. Green?" John asked, immediately regretting the question as Laura's face fell. "I do not know. I spent nearly everything I had on the train ticket west. I have maybe $5 to my name, and that was in my trunk." She laughed bitterly. "So nothing at all, really. I suppose I could look for work in Eager, but I do not know what there would be for someone like me. Eager is not a large town, maybe 300 people. There is a general store, a saloon, a church, not much else. Some ranches nearby, a few farms. Perhaps someone needs a seamstress or a cook." John thought of the rough men who made up most of Eager's population, miners and ranchers and drifters. "Perhaps," he said, though he doubted it. They spent the day in the cabin as the storm continued. John did his best to find ways to occupy the time, tending to necessary chores inside while Laura watched the rain through the window. He offered her one of his shirts and a pair of pants to wear since her dress was still damp and damaged beyond repair, and she accepted gratefully. The clothes hung on her small frame, and she had to roll up the sleeves and legs, but at least they were dry. As evening approached, John made venison stew and biscuits, and they ate by firelight as the storm finally began to ease. Laura helped him clean up afterward, moving around his small kitchen with surprising ease, and John realized how much he had missed this, the simple comfort of another person's presence in his home. "Tell me about your ranch," Laura said as they sat by the fire. "What do you raise?" "Cattle mostly, some horses. I have about 200 head of cattle right now, though I am hoping to expand. It is hard work for one man, but I manage." "You do it all yourself?" "I hire help during roundup and branding, but otherwise yes. I cannot afford to pay a hand year-round, and truthfully I prefer the solitude most of the time." He paused. "Or I thought I did." Laura looked at him curiously. "What changed?" John met her eyes across the fire. "I suppose I realized there is a difference between being alone by choice and being lonely. For a long time I told myself I wanted to be alone, that it was easier than risking my heart again after losing Martha. But lately, the silence has felt less like peace and more like emptiness." "I understand that feeling," Laura said softly. "After my parents died, I was surrounded by people in Chicago, but I have never felt more alone. My brother made it clear I was a burden, that he was doing me a favor by keeping a roof over my head. The women at the dress shop were kind enough, but they had their own families, their own concerns. I was just existing, not really living." "Is that why you agreed to come west? To feel alive again?" "Partly. And partly because I was desperate." She smiled sadly. "I wish I could say it was some grand adventure I was seeking, but mostly I was just running away." "Sometimes running away is the bravest thing you can do," John said. They talked late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes, their fears. John found himself telling Laura things he had not spoken of in years, about his childhood in Missouri, his decision to head west after the war between the states, His first meeting with Martha at a church social in Albuquerque. Laura in turn spoke of growing up in Chicago, of dreams she had once had to become a teacher, of the slow erosion of those dreams as poverty and circumstance narrowed her options. By the time they finally said goodnight, John felt as though he had known Laura far longer than just a day. There was an ease between them, a natural comfort that surprised him with its intensity. He lay on the floor by the dying fire, listening to the rain finally taper off to a soft patter, and wondered what the morning would bring. The sun rose clear and bright, the storm having passed completely during the night. John woke to find Laura already up, standing at the window and looking out at the transformed landscape. The world was washed clean, everything glistening with moisture, but the creek was still swollen and muddy. "Good morning," John said, and Laura turned with a smile that made something in his chest tighten. "It is beautiful," she said. "I have never seen country like this. It is so different from Chicago." John joined her at the window, looking out at the red earth and the distant mountains. "It can be harsh, but there is a beauty to it, a freedom." They had breakfast together, and then John saddled his horse to ride out and assess the damage from the storm. Laura asked to come with him, and though he worried she might still be weak from her ordeal, she insisted she felt fine. He helped her onto the horse and mounted behind her, and they rode out across his land. The storm had indeed caused damage. Several sections of fence were down, and he counted at least 3 cattle that had not survived the flooding. But overall, his spread had weathered it well, and he felt a surge of pride as they rode the boundaries of his property, Laura asking questions about everything she saw. "You really built all this yourself?" she asked as they paused on a rise overlooking the ranch. "With these 2 hands," John confirmed. "It is not much compared to some of the big operations, but it is mine." "It is wonderful," Laura said, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "You should be proud." They rode into Eager in the afternoon, John having decided he should let Thomas Green know that his intended bride had arrived, albeit not as planned. The town was busy with people emerging after the storm, and John felt acutely conscious of the curious looks they received as they rode down the main street together. Thomas Green's ranch was south of town, but John knew the man sometimes stayed at the hotel when he had business in Eager. Sure enough, they found him at the saloon, a tall, weathered man in his late 40s with hard eyes and a harder mouth. "You Thomas Green?" John asked, though he knew the answer. The man looked up from his whiskey, his gaze moving from John to Laura and back again. "Who is asking?" "John Whitmore. I have something that belongs to you in a manner of speaking." Laura stiffened beside him, but John continued. "This is Miss Laura Sinclair. She was on her way to meet you when her wagon went into Apache Creek during the storm. I pulled her out." Green's eyes narrowed as he studied Laura. "You are the woman from Chicago." "Yes," Laura said quietly. Green stood, moving closer, and John had to resist the urge to step between them. Green circled Laura slowly, looking her up and down as one might inspect a horse for purchase. John felt his jaw tighten. "You are smaller than I expected," Green said finally, "and wearing men's clothes. Not exactly how I imagined my bride arriving." "Her dress was ruined in the creek," John said, his voice cold. "She is lucky to be alive." Green barely glanced at him. "I suppose you will do. Can you cook, clean? You look like you might break in a strong wind." Laura lifted her chin. "I can cook and clean, and I am stronger than I look." "We will see about that. Ranch life is hard. My first wife was not suited to it." He said it matter-of-factly, as though discussing the weather. "Come on then. We will go to the preacher now, get this done." "Now?" Laura looked startled. "But I just arrived. Should we not take some time to get to know each other?" Green's laugh was harsh. I am not paying for you to stay at the hotel while we court, girl. I put out money to bring you here to be a wife, and that is what you will be. Today." John felt anger rising in his chest at the man's callousness, at the way he spoke to Laura as though she were property. He opened his mouth to say something, but Laura spoke first. "I need to think about this." Green's face darkened. "Think about what? We had an agreement. I sent money for your passage, which I used to get here, and I am grateful for that. But you speak to me as though I am a piece of livestock you purchased. That was not the tone of your letters. Letters are just words, girl. This is reality. Out here you work or you starve. I need a woman to cook and clean and give me sons. You need a roof over your head. That is the arrangement." Laura looked at John, and he saw uncertainty and fear in her gray eyes. He made a decision in that moment, one that surprised him even as the words left his mouth. "She is welcome to stay with me until she decides what she wants to do." Green turned on him, his face flushed with anger. "This is none of your concern, Whitmore. She came here to be my wife, and my wife she will be." "Only if she chooses it," John said evenly. "She is not your property, Green. She is a free woman who can make her own decisions." For a moment John thought Green might throw a punch, but the older man seemed to reconsider, his eyes calculating. "Fine. You keep her for now, Whitmore, but the offer expires in 1 week. After that, if she is not married to me, she is on her own. I will not be made a fool of by some city woman who thinks she is too good for honest work." With that, Green turned and stalked out of the saloon, leaving John and Laura standing in the awkward silence that followed. Every eye in the place was on them, and John could practically hear the gossip starting already. "We should go," he said quietly, and Laura nodded. They rode back to the ranch in silence, and John wondered if he had just made a terrible mistake. He had essentially offered to house an unmarried woman, alone on his ranch, which would set every tongue in eager wagging. But when he glanced back at Laura sitting behind him on the horse, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, he found he did not regret it. Back at the cabin, Laura finally spoke. "You did not have to do that. I do not want to cause you trouble. He had no right to speak to you that way, to treat you like property. But he is right in a sense. We did have an agreement. He paid for my passage. An agreement made in good faith, based on letters that apparently did not reflect his true character. You do not owe him anything, Laura." She smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "You barely know me, John. Why would you take such a risk for a stranger?" John thought about that question, about the answer he knew in his heart but was afraid to voice. "You are not a stranger anymore," he said finally. "And I think maybe you are exactly what this ranch has been missing." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. Laura looked away first, color rising in her cheeks. "I should find work in town. I cannot impose on your hospitality indefinitely. You are not imposing, and truthfully, I could use help around here. The house needs a woman's touch, and there are chores I have been putting off because I am always busy with the cattle. If you would be willing to help with cooking and such, I could pay you a small wage, enough to save up if you want to go elsewhere eventually." It was not entirely a lie. The house was in a sorry state, and John knew his own cooking left much to be desired. But it was also an excuse, a way to keep Laura close without pushing too hard, too fast. Laura considered his offer. "It would not be proper me living here unchaperoned. You can have the bedroom. I will sleep out here, and we can go to church on Sundays. Let people see we are doing things respectable." Even as he said it, John knew the town would talk regardless, but perhaps they could weather it. "For how long? As long as you need, or want." He met her eyes. "No pressure, Laura. If you decide you want to marry Green after all, or if you want to go back east or anywhere else, I will help you do it. But you do not have to decide today or this week. Take the time you need." Laura was quiet for a long moment, and John could see her weighing her options, none of them particularly good. Finally, she nodded. "1 month. I will stay 1 month, help you around the ranch, and then I will make a decision about what to do next." "Fair enough," John agreed, though his heart sank a little at the thought of a deadline, a point at which Laura might leave. They fell into a routine over the following days. Laura proved to be an excellent cook, far better than John, and she threw herself into cleaning and organizing his neglected home with an energy that amazed him. She scrubbed floors, washed curtains, mended clothes, and planted a small garden near the house. John found himself coming in earlier each day, eager to see what she had accomplished, to share meals with her, to talk by the fire in the evenings. For her part, Laura seemed to blossom in the work. The wan, frightened woman he had pulled from the creek was replaced by someone stronger, more confident. Color returned to her cheeks and light to her eyes. She asked endless questions about the ranch, about ranching, and John found himself teaching her to ride, to help with the gentler stock work, enjoying her enthusiasm and quick learning. Sunday came and they rode to church together in Eager. John felt the weight of disapproving stares as they entered the small wooden building, heard the whispers that followed them to a pew. But Laura held her head high, and they sat through the service with as much dignity as they could muster. Afterward, the minister's wife, a kind woman named Agnes Porter, approached them. "Miss Sinclair, I heard about your ordeal in the creek. How terrifying that must have been." "It was, Mrs. Porter, but Mr. Whitmore saved my life. The Lord works in mysterious ways." Agnes looked between them, her expression thoughtful. "I also heard you were meant to marry Thomas Green." Laura's smile faltered. "That was the plan, but circumstances have changed." "I see." Agnes paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I hope you know that people will talk, you living out at the Whitmore ranch unchaperoned. I mean you no disrespect, but I thought you should be aware." "I appreciate your concern," Laura said. "Mr. Whitmore has been nothing but a gentleman, and I am working as his housekeeper in exchange for room and board while I decide my future." Agnes nodded. "Of course. And if you ever need someone to talk to woman, my door is always open." It was a small kindness, but Laura seemed touched by it, and they thanked Agnes before making their way back to the ranch. As they rode, Laura was quiet, and John wondered what she was thinking. "Are you having regrets?" he asked finally. "About what?" "Staying at the ranch, turning down Green." "All of it." Laura was silent for a long moment. "No," she said finally. "I do not regret it. Is that foolish? I have no prospects, no money, no real plan for the future. But for the first time since my parents died, I feel like I am living rather than just surviving." "That is not foolish," John said, his heart beating faster. "I feel the same way." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgment of feelings neither was quite ready to name. But it was there, growing stronger with each passing day, an attraction that went beyond physical to something deeper, more profound. The days turned into weeks, and John found himself falling more deeply in love with Laura than he had thought possible. It was different from what he had felt for Martha. That had been the love of youth, passionate and intense, but also in some ways shallow, based more on what they hoped they might become than who they truly were. This, with Laura, was built on real knowledge of each other, on shared work and shared dreams and the hundreds of small moments that made up their days. He loved the way she hummed while she cooked, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, the way she had learned to handle the horses without fear. He loved how she looked in the evenings with her hair down, sitting by the fire with a book he had borrowed from town for her. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her intelligence and her kindness. But he did not speak of his feelings, afraid that doing so might shatter the fragile thing growing between them. Laura had been through so much, had come west expecting one future and found something entirely different. He did not want to pressure her, to make her feel she owed him anything simply because he had pulled her from the creek. One evening, nearly 3 weeks after Laura had arrived, they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The heat of the day was fading to pleasant coolness, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called to its pack. "I love it here," Laura said suddenly. "I never thought I would say that about anywhere, but I do. The wildness of it, the freedom." Back in Chicago, everything felt so confined, so predetermined. Here, I feel like anything is possible. "What would you do if anything were possible?" John asked. Laura turned to look at him. "I think I would stay, build a life here in this beautiful, harsh country. Find someone to share it with who sees me as a partner, not a possession." She paused. "What would you do, John, if anything were possible?" John's mouth went dry. "I would ask you to stay, not as a housekeeper, but as my wife, as my partner in all things." The words were out before he could stop them, and for a moment he froze, terrified he had pushed too hard, too fast. But Laura did not look away. Her gray eyes held his, searching. "You mean that?" "I do. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know you came here expecting something different. But Laura, these have been the happiest weeks I have known in years. Maybe ever. I am falling in love with you. I think maybe I started falling the moment I pulled you out of that creek and you opened your eyes and I saw the fire in them, the will to survive." Laura's eyes were bright with tears. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been fighting it because I was afraid. Afraid it was too soon, too fast. Afraid I was just grateful to you for saving me and confusing that with love. But John, this is real. What I feel for you is real." John reached out and took her hand, marveling at how small it was in his, how right it felt. "Then stay. Marry me. Not because you have nowhere else to go, but because you want to build a life here, with me." "Yes," Laura breathed. "Yes, I will marry you." John pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a soft, gentle kiss that spoke of promise and hope and new beginnings. Laura kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, and for the first time since Martha died, John felt whole again. They were married a week later in the same small church in Eager, with Agnes Porter and a few other townspeople as witnesses. Laura wore a simple blue dress that Agnes had helped her make from fabric John had bought at the general store, and she had never looked more beautiful to him. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, John felt a surge of joy so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. The months that followed were filled with hard work and deep happiness. Laura proved to be everything John could have hoped for in a wife and partner. She helped with the ranch in ways he had never expected, learning to rope and brand alongside him, to birth calves and break horses. She turned the cabin into a real home, warm and welcoming, and John found himself eager to finish his work each day just to return to her. Their love deepened with time, growing roots that anchored them both. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, shared dreams and plans for the future. Laura wanted to expand the garden, maybe get some chickens and pigs. John wanted to increase the herd, build a bigger barn. Together they began to envision the ranch not just as it was, but as it could be. In the intimate darkness of their bedroom, John discovered new depths to love, to connection. Laura came to him without fear or shame, with a passion that matched his own. She saved him from the loneliness that had been eating away at him, gave him purpose beyond simple survival. And he gave her safety, respect, and a love that valued her for exactly who she was. The seasons changed, fall giving way to winter and then winter to spring. Laura proved to be strong enough to weather the hardships of ranch life, the isolation and the hard work. When a particularly harsh cold snap in January killed several head of cattle, she worked beside John day and night to save what they could, never complaining about the bitter temperatures or the exhausting labor. In return, John made sure Laura knew every day how precious she was to him, how grateful he was that fate had brought her to his creek in that storm. He brought her small gifts from town, a book of poetry, a length of ribbon for her hair, a new set of cooking pots when the old ones wore out. He held her when she cried missing her parents, and rejoiced with her when letters came from old friends in Chicago. By the time spring arrived again, Laura had been at the ranch for a full year. They celebrated their first anniversary with a picnic by the creek, the same creek that had nearly claimed Laura's life. It ran peaceful and gentle now under the warm April sun, and as they sat on its banks, John reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. "You ever regret it?" he asked Laura as they shared slices of the cake she had baked. "Coming west, marrying me instead of Green," Laura laughed and leaned against his shoulder. "Not for one single moment. You saved my life in more ways than one, John Whitmore. You gave me a home, a purpose, and a love I never dreamed I would find." "You saved mine too," John said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You reminded me what it means to truly live." In June, Laura told John she was pregnant, and his joy was boundless. The thought of a child, of seeing Laura grow round with his baby, of holding a new life they had created together, filled him with wonder. Laura bloomed in her pregnancy, more beautiful than ever despite the inevitable discomforts. John found himself consumed with preparations, building a cradle from smooth pine, adding a room onto the cabin for the baby, making sure Laura had everything she could possibly need. He was terrified something would go wrong, that he might lose her as Thomas Green had lost his wife, but Laura seemed serenely confident. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he fussed too much. "I am strong, and Agnes has promised to be here when my time comes. Everything will be fine." And it was. On a cold February morning in 1886, after a long night of labor that tested every ounce of John's courage, Laura gave birth to a healthy baby boy. John wept as he held his son for the first time, this tiny perfect miracle who had his mother's gray eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. They named him James, after John's father, and he became the center of their world. John had never known he could love anything as much as he loved this child, or that watching Laura become a mother could make him fall even more deeply in love with her. She was patient and tender with James, singing him soft lullabies and showering him with affection, but also practical and capable in the way she managed the challenges of caring for an infant while still helping with the ranch. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. With Laura's good sense and John's hard work, they expanded the herd and improved the land. They hired a young hand named Sam to help with the heavy work, giving John more time with his family. The cabin grew too, room by room, until it was a proper house, large and comfortable. 2 years after James was born, Laura gave birth to a daughter they named Grace. She was a tiny, delicate thing, but with a will of iron that reminded John so much of her mother it made him smile. James adored his little sister, and John loved watching his children play together in the yard, while he and Laura worked side by side in the garden or with the horses. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work, of challenges met and overcome together. There were hard times, droughts that tested them and winters that seemed endless, but there were far more good times. Harvests that exceeded expectations, calves born healthy and strong, quiet evenings with the family gathered around the fire. John watched his children grow, strong and happy and secure in their parents' love. James showed promise as a rancher, already learning to rope and ride at an impressive age. Grace was clever and curious, always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Both children adored their mother, and John felt his heart swell every time he saw Laura with them. So patient and loving. The town of Eager grew too over the years, becoming more established and less wild. The church added a bell tower and a proper school was built, which thrilled Laura. She was insistent that their children receive a good education, and John agreed wholeheartedly. He wanted them to have every advantage, every opportunity. On their 5th anniversary, John and Laura returned to the creek for another picnic, leaving the children with Agnes Porter for the afternoon. They sat in the same spot where they had spent their 1st anniversary, watching the water flow. "You remember the first time I saw this creek?" Laura asked, a slight smile on her lips. "I am not likely to forget it," John said. "I thought I had lost you before I even knew you." "I was so angry when I went under," Laura said. "Angry that I had come all this way just to die in some muddy creek in the middle of nowhere. But then you pulled me out, and I opened my eyes and saw you, and something just clicked into place. Like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "I felt it too," John admitted. "This sense of rightness, of fate maybe, though I am not usually one for such notions." Laura turned to face him fully. "Do you think things would have been different if I had married Thomas Green? Would I have learned to love him, to be happy?" John considered the question seriously. "I think you would have survived it. You are strong enough for anything, but I do not think you would have been truly happy. Green wanted a servant, not a partner. And you deserve to be loved for exactly who you are, all your strength and intelligence and fire." "You make me sound rather formidable," Laura teased. "You are formidable," John said seriously. "You saved me from a half-life, Laura. Before you, I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. You taught me how to love again, how to hope again. You gave me a family and a future I had stopped believing I could have." Laura's eyes filled with tears. "And you gave me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a purpose, a love that values me, children who will grow up secure and loved, freedom to be myself." She leaned in and kissed him softly. "I love you, John Whitmore, more today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." They made love that afternoon by the creek, slow and tender, reaffirming vows that went deeper than any spoken in a church. And as they lay afterward in each other's arms, the sun warm on their skin and the sound of the creek a gentle music, John thought about how one moment, one decision could change everything. If he had not ridden out to check his fences that day, if he had not seen Laura in the water, if his rope had not caught or his horse had not been strong enough, if Laura had chosen to marry Green after all out of obligation or desperation, any of those things could have happened, and their lives would have been entirely different, but they had not. Instead, fate or luck or divine providence had brought them together. Two lonely souls finding each other in the vastness of the Arizona territory. Laura had saved him from a life without love, had pulled him from his own kind of drowning, the slow suffocation of loneliness and grief. And he had given her a chance to choose her own path, to become the woman she was meant to be. The years continued to roll by. James grew into a strong, capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Grace proved to be every bit as formidable as her mother, with a sharp mind and a kind heart. When she was 10, she announced her intention to become a teacher, and both John and Laura encouraged her dreams. Laura became a pillar of the community, helping with the church and the school, welcoming new settlers with the same kindness Agnes Porter had shown her. She never forgot what it was like to be a stranger in a strange land, and she made it her mission to ensure no one else felt as alone as she once had. John expanded the ranch until it was one of the most successful in the territory, but he never let work consume him the way it had before Laura. Family came first, always, and he made sure to spend time with his wife and children every single day. He taught his son to rope and his daughter to read. He held his wife close every night and thanked God for the gift of her presence in his life. When Arizona finally achieved statehood in 1912, John and Laura celebrated with their now grown children and their grandchildren. James had married a sweet girl from Springerville and given them 2 grandsons. Grace had indeed become a teacher and married a lawyer from Tucson, giving them a granddaughter who was the spitting image of Laura. John was 62 now, his hair gone gray and his body showing the wear of decades of hard work. But Laura, at 53, was still beautiful to him, still the woman he had pulled from the creek all those years ago, still the love of his life. They sat on the porch of their house, which had grown and evolved over the years into a sprawling ranch house, and watched their grandchildren play in the yard. "We have built a good life," Laura said, taking his hand. "The best life," John agreed. "All because a stubborn woman fell into a creek and I was fool enough to fish her out." Laura laughed and swatted his arm playfully. "You were not a fool. You were my hero. You still are." "And you were mine," John said, raising her hand to his lips. "My hero, my partner, my love. Everything good in my life traces back to that day I pulled you from the water." They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their hard work and dedication. Their children were healthy and happy, their grandchildren full of life and promise. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge in the vast Arizona sky, John thought about all the years they had shared, all the moments big and small that had woven together to create this beautiful life. The laughter and the tears, the triumphs and the struggles, the quiet mornings and the passionate nights. Every single moment had been worth it. Laura leaned her head on his shoulder and John wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. They had saved each other all those years ago, 2 lost souls finding rescue in each other's arms. And in the decades since, they had built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch or a loving family, but a true partnership based on mutual respect and deep, abiding love. "I would do it all again," Laura murmured. "Every single moment." "So would I," John said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "So would I." Inside the house, they could hear their family laughing and talking, the sounds of love and life and connection. This was their legacy, John thought. Not just the land or the cattle or the house, but this family they had created, these bonds of love they had forged. The creek still ran behind the house, peaceful and gentle most of the time, though it could still rage wild during storms. John and Laura walked down to it sometimes, to the spot where it had all begun, and remembered. They told their grandchildren the story of how Grandpa had saved Grandma from drowning, and how Grandma had saved Grandpa right back, though from something you could not see. As they grew older, John and Laura leaned on each other more, both physically and emotionally. When John's arthritis made it hard to work, Laura was there to help. When Laura's eyesight began to fail, John read to her every evening. They had promised to face everything together, and they kept that promise through all the challenges that age brought. On their 30th anniversary, the family threw them a big celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around to honor the couple who had become such an integral part of the community. There were speeches and toasts, food and music, and throughout it, all John and Laura sat together, hands clasped, smiling at the life they had built. 30 years, Laura said wonderingly. It feels like both a lifetime and no time at all. The best 30 years of my life, John said, and I hope for 30 more. God granted them almost that. They celebrated their 50th anniversary in 1934, both of them well into their 80s but still sharp in mind and spirit. Their children and grandchildren gathered, and even some great-grandchildren, the fruits of the love John and Laura had planted so long ago. They renewed their vows that day, standing before the same minister who had married them, though he was ancient now himself. John's voice shook as he promised once again to love and cherish Laura for all his days, and tears ran down Laura's weathered cheeks as she made the same promises to him. "You saved my life," John said, departing from the traditional vows. "You saved me from loneliness, from despair, from a half-lived life. You gave me purpose and joy and a love I treasure more than anything in this world. I am so grateful that creek carried you to me." "And I am grateful you were there to pull me out," Laura said, her voice strong despite her tears. "You gave me freedom and respect and a partnership I never dreamed possible. You showed me what real love looks like, and you gave me a family and a life beyond my wildest dreams. I would drown 1,000 times over if it meant ending up in your arms." There was not a dry eye in the church. John and Laura lived 2 more years together before John passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 86, Laura beside him as she had been every night for over 50 years. She held his hand as he drew his last breath and whispered that she loved him, that she would see him again. Laura followed him just 3 months later, her heart unable to bear the separation. She died in the house they had built together, surrounded by her children and grandchildren at peace with a life well lived. They were buried side by side in the eager cemetery, their graves marked by a simple stone that read, "John and Laura Whitmore, 2 souls saved, a lifetime of love." Below that, the dates. John 1848-1934, Laura 1861-1935. The ranch passed to James, who ran it with the same dedication his father had shown, and eventually to his sons. The house still stood, expanded and modernized over the years, but retaining the original cabin at its heart. The creek still ran behind it, sometimes gentle and sometimes wild, a reminder of where it all began. The family never forgot the story of how John saved Laura from drowning, and how Laura saved John from a life without love. It became part of their heritage, passed down through generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest rescues are not from physical danger but from loneliness, from despair, from the slow death of a spirit that has forgotten how to hope. And in the end, that was the real miracle of their story. Not that John happened to be riding by that creek at that exact moment, though that was remarkable enough. Not that his rope had caught or his horse had been strong enough, though both were fortunate. The real miracle was that 2 wounded souls had found each other and chosen to build a life together. That they had turned trauma into triumph, loneliness into love, and near death into a legacy that would echo through the generations. Their great-great-grandchildren still ranch that land, still tell the story, still visit the creek where it all began. And sometimes, when the light hits the water just right, they swear they can feel the presence of John and Laura, still together, still in love, still saving each other over and over again in all the ways that matter. The story of the lonely rancher and the woman he saved from drowning became legend in Eager, Arizona. A testament to the power of love to transform lives, to heal wounds, to create beauty from hardship. It reminded people that sometimes salvation comes when you least expect it, in forms you never anticipated, and that the greatest adventure is not conquering new lands, but opening your heart to another person. John and Laura's love story was not perfect. They had arguments and struggles, moments of doubt and difficulty. Ranch life was hard, and there were times when money was tight and the future uncertain. They faced loss and grief, including the death of a stillborn daughter between James and Grace, a sorrow that marked them both deeply. But through it all, they had each other. They faced every challenge as partners, every joy as companions, every sorrow with the comfort of shared grief. They built their life together brick by brick, day by day, moment by moment, until they had created something that would outlast them both. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their love. Not the passion of early romance, though they had known that. Not the excitement of new beginnings, though they had experienced that too. But the deep, abiding commitment to face life together, to choose each other every single day, to save each other over and over from all the things that threatened to pull them under. John saved Laura from drowning in the creek that storm-soaked day in 1884. But Laura saved John from something far more insidious, from the slow drowning of a spirit that had forgotten how to love, how to hope, how to truly live. Together, they proved that salvation is not a one-time event but an ongoing choice, a daily decision to reach out your hand to the person you love and hold on tight, no matter what storms may come. Their legacy lived on in the land they had tamed, the family they had raised, the community they had served, and the love they had shared. Generations later, their descendants still walked the land John and Laura had called home, still carried the values they had instilled, still believed in the transformative power of love. The ranch house still stood, a monument to their hard work and dedication. The creek still flowed, sometimes violent in storms but mostly peaceful, life-giving water that sustained the land and the people on it. And somewhere in the Arizona earth, John and Laura rested side by side, together even in death as they had been in life. Their love story complete but never forgotten, their salvation of each other echoing through time as a reminder that the greatest rescue of all is learning to love and be loved in return.